Democracy Burn and Gettysburg Turn. I am, as always, your host, Christopher Paul Dugdale, MEDMA. We are Duncanville High School in these United States, America, by the way, and today is December 4th. And on this date in 1791, the British newspaper called The Observer was started. This is the first newspaper in the world, and this was a very important moment in world history as we had the press and the news, and you could find out stories of things that happen around the world or sometimes right around you. So, everyone, have a great day. I hope that you're impressed. Dramatic pause. As we really begin today, there was a major diplomatic challenge that the U.S. was going to face with the rest of the world. Again, European forces wanted the United States to fail as a nation, and because it threatened monarchies everywhere. So the very fact that we had a working democracy was a threat to the rest of the world. So the South wants to get recognized because if Europe does recognize them and send them military assistance, and they can look at the American Revolution as kind of a precursor of what could happen there if the British and French sent weapons and troops to split up the United States. And the Confederacy really thought that they needed it because of all the cotton that they had. But in truth, Europe needed the wheat from the North a lot more than they needed the cotton. Now, William Seward, who was Secretary of State and quite possibly insane, proposed that the United States have a war with Great Britain or France, which would reunite the nation. Okay, so anyway, that's kind of the craziness of what's going on. So the South wanted an alliance with Europe and diplomacy, and the North didn't want anyone to get into the middle of our deal. And if you look over there on the left-hand side, you can see Britain and France kind of off in the background, smiling and enjoying what's going on between the Union and then the Confederacy, kind of just beating at each other, you know. The Trent Affair. So, there was a British ship that was sent over to pick up two Confederate diplomats, and the British wanted to hear out what they wanted. Now, in truth, and we'll talk about a few different things from here on out, but in truth, the British were never going to support the Confederacy because of slavery. The British were at the forefront of ending slavery worldwide, and once they decided to take a stance against it, then they weren't going to do anything to help any other nations that were trying to perpetuate slavery. But they did like to do this on the surface just because this would cause problems for other countries. And so whenever the Union finds out that they're transporting two Confederate diplomats, this ship is seized by the Union, and the two diplomats are jailed. Eventually they release them and let them go visit with the British. Now, this doesn't end some of the chaos that was created by the British. The Alabama was a Confederate blockade runner. Okay? So it was built in Britain. It wasn't armed by Britain, but it wasn't armed over here. It never made it to a Confederate port. Okay? And also, a lot of the damage they did was in the middle of the ocean or close to Europe. Okay? So it was not armed by the British, but it was really manned by British troops, okay? And they went through and they started attacking, and they stole and sank millions of dollars from the Union. So, as a result of the actions of the Alabama, U.S. diplomat Charles Francis Adams, whose father was John Quincy Adams, whose grandfather was John Adams, he negotiated with Britain to stop building ships for the Confederacy. All in all, the British captured about 250 ships. And as a result of the negotiations by Charles Francis Adams, the British were going to pay the U.S. about $15.5 million in damages alone from the Alabama. And he sought some other damages as well. So that was the great work of the diplomatic family of the Adamses. Well, anyway. So again, looks like a fun guy to go to a party with. Okay, it's time to talk about the Battle of Manassas. Okay, also known as the First Battle of Bull Run, which of course at the time they did not call the First Battle of Bull Run. They either called it the Battle of Bull Run or the Battle of Manassas, but surely they did not call it the First Battle of Bull Run before knowing that there'd ever be another battle. So the Union is going to launch an invasion into the South. Okay, and the first shots are actually fired at a house, and the guy who owned the house afterwards is going to sell it, and he's going to move to Appomattox, which ironically is where the Civil War ended. So the first shots were actually fired at his house, and they actually hold the peace talks in the same guy's, living room area. So basically the sitting area of his house, they negotiate the treaty. So this poor guy has the Civil War begin and end on his property. Hello, irony. Not ironing, but irony. Okay, so what happened is the Union forces are pushing in, and Confederate Stonewall Jackson is actually going to force the troops to retreat from the Union. He sets himself out just outside of visual range, and so Union troops were firing right over his head, and he was landing all of his shots. Going up against him, they said, was like going up against a stone wall, and that's where he gets the nickname of Stonewall Jackson. His actual name was Thomas Jackson, and the only thing that could defeat him was being shot in the hand by one of his own men, which caused him to have the hand amputated, and then he died of pneumonia in shock after having his hand cut off. So if it had not been for him being shot in the hand by his own men on accident, then that would have gone much, much differently. The Congress, many members of Congress actually went out and had picnic lunches and watched some of the battle unfold, thinking that the war was going to be over in a matter of hours. And just as a result of the skill of the Confederate Army, it showed that this was going to be a much longer war than what they thought. So the main thing from the First Battle of Bull Run that you might need to know on a test is that it showed the North that it would be a long war. Okay, George McClellan. He went to West Point. He fought in the Mexican War. And he actually is going to be sent over to Europe to watch what was going on in the Crimean War. Okay? Remember, they would send troops over to observe other wars, and you would report back what you saw, and you could see innovations in warfare. So during the Civil War, there are Prussians that are over here. Prussians are Germans, by the way, but Germany is not created for about another 6 years after the Civil War is completed. There's people from France, people from Britain, people from Russia. So a lot of people over kind of watching the techniques and strategies used in the Civil War. He is in charge of the Union Army twice. Lincoln will fire him twice, and after the second time he will run for president and almost take the presidency, the re-election from Lincoln. He created the Peninsula Campaign, and the idea was to capture Richmond, Virginia, which was the capital of the Confederacy. So, and here we go. So the 7 Days Battles. This was an attempt at McClellan to initiate his Peninsula Plan. Okay, so Lee is actually going to stop McClellan's forces from attacking Richmond, and they had 7 separate battles in 7 days. And Lee loses 20,000 men to McClellan's 10,000. Okay, so Lee loses a lot of men, but Where was I going with that? There was something to that. Oh yeah, but he did hold him off. Okay, so McClellan had a 6-step plan of total war. So this is basically when you commit to total war, you're willing to commit all your resources, and there's no such things as civilians once that happens. Okay, uh, he was going to continue the blockade that was initiated by General Scott. Uh, he was going to seize the Mississippi River to split the Confederacy. He was going to free all the slaves, capture Richmond, and engage the main enemy. He never really has a chance to do any of these things because Lincoln doesn't have patience. Lincoln wants people to go forward and attack, and McClellan was someone who wanted to wait to make a move until he had a overwhelming advantage. Okay, the truth is you'd want to serve under McClellan and not Lee because Lee was not afraid to spill blood. However, find a textbook that says anything negative about Lee, and I'll give you all the money in my pocket, which is a paperclip and a penny. All of that can be yours. Just find the textbook. Okay, so during the Civil War, you also have the first modern naval battle, and this is between the Virginia and the Monitor. Now, what had happened was the Confederacy captured the Merrimac, which was a northern ship, and during the attack, it caught on fire, and it burns down to the surface of the water. The ship does. So the Confederates took and plated the ship with iron. They put 4 cannons on each side, and 1 cannon in the front and 1 cannon in the back. It was steam powered now, so you couldn't, if you were an opposing ship, you couldn't hit it with a cannonball and knock out the mainsail. You would shoot it with a cannonball, and the walls were sloped, and so what would happen is it would bounce off at an angle. Sometimes it would land back on your ship, and sometimes it would just land outside the water, but doing any damage to it was nearly impossible because of all of the iron plating on it. So the Merrimac, once they plated it, they renamed it the Virginia after the capital state of the Confederacy. And so it starts running amok, and it starts attacking Union shipping. At one point, it was engaged with a ship that was actually commanded by the captain of the Virginia's brother, and they were about to destroy that ship whenever the Union actually let out their new innovation, which was the Monitor. Now, the Monitor was a much smaller ship than the Merrimac, but it had this great innovation called the turret. And so they had a cannon inside the turret, and the turret could, turn 360 degrees, so it could hit a target in any direction. So it goes into battle against the Virginia, and the fighting starts. They're shooting back and forth. It's the 10 cannons of the Merrimac or the Virginia versus the 1 cannon of the Monitor. The battle rages all day. There's both the ships are smoking just because of all the gunpowder being fired. The Virginia runs up and gets stuck in the sand. So both ships go off thinking that they'd won the battle. The Merrimac, though, is able to break loose, and it goes up the river to where it gets pretty much permanently stuck, and then they blow up the ship. The Monitor would go out, and again, this was a major innovation with the turret, and other ships would copy it from this point forward. It will sink about a year and a half later, and they've been recovering certain parts of it over the years since. So, the Battle of the Ironclads. Okay, first in warfare. The Battle of Antietam. Okay, or for idiots who are trying to pronounce this, the Battle of Antietam. Okay, which apparently they were big fans of the Wizard of Oz. Okay, you can see all the bodies laid on the ground. This is one of the bloodiest day of fighting in U.S. history up to that date. These pictures were sent home. People were passing out. These are types of sites that people had never seen before, and now it's brought into their homes. Uh, so McClellan stops an invasion by Lee. Okay, and whenever Lee's invasion stopped, he retreats, and McClellan doesn't chase Lee, so Lincoln fires him. Lincoln also at this point will issue the Emancipation Proclamation, which ends slavery in the Confederacy. Now, this is really one of the most overrated things in U.S. history because everyone assumes that this frees slaves, but it doesn't free a single slave because the only place that it would free slaves was in places that were still in rebellion. So the slave states of Delaware, Maryland, Kentucky, and Missouri still had slavery protected under law. All of the states in the Confederacy no longer had slavery according to the Union, but remember they didn't have to listen to them, if that makes any sense. Okay? And in reality, this causes more problems than it solves because once this is issued, you have thousands and thousands of Union soldiers who decided to desert because they didn't want to fight to end slavery. They were just fighting to maintain the Union. Meanwhile, in other countries surrounding the United States, okay, you have the Dominion of Canada. So in 1867, against Canada's will, Great Britain is going to issue independence for the nation of Canada. The Canadians did not want to leave, but Britain said, you guys are on your own, and Canada says, well, anytime you ever need anything from us, we're there, so if you ever get into a war, we'll send you troops. And, I mean, for the most part, it has kind of worked alongside, and whatever they do in Great Britain, they do in Canada. Now, the biggest part of chaos that happened during this time was in Mexico. Okay, and so without the U.S. there to enforce the Monroe Doctrine, France sent an invasion fleet into Mexico to take over the nation. This is where they have the famous battle in 1863 on the 5th of May, also known as Cinco de Mayo. And at the Battle of Puebla, French forces were stopped by a Mexican army and pushed back, and the Mexicans went around the city and took Mexico City. But it's a major celebration by Mexico every year, and many people in the United States think that that's actually Independence Day, and the truth is it is not. So Napoleon III, who is the nephew of Napoleon Bonaparte, is the leader of France at the time, and he will install an Austrian by the name of Maximilian as emperor. Okay, so Maximilian comes in, and he actually works really hard to actually take care of the Mexican people and the poor. He thinks he's really beloved. He lives there with his wife, who's known as the beautiful Carlotta, which is not as beautiful as she is a Carlotta. And once the Civil War is over, France is going to remove all of its troops. Maximilian stays because he thinks the people love him and that he will be honored. But then they execute him in front of his wife, the beautiful single Carlotta, and she will return to Europe, and, he kind of died for nothing. So he is succeeded by the first the first indigenous leader by the name of Benito Juarez, and Benito Juarez will rule until the dictatorship is his rule is replaced by the dictatorship of Porfirio Diaz, and we'll talk about Porfirio Diaz later. Meanwhile, back in Civil War. So at Fredericksburg, you have Ambrose Burnside, who apparently invented the sideburn. Look at the size of those sideburns. That's an interesting look. kind of makes him look like a bulldog. Up there with the hair at the top, looks a little bit like ears. It's kind of like someone took a bulldog and put a normal nose on him, and that's how you make an Ambrose Burnside. So Burnside will take over after McClellan, and he will launch an assault against Lee and fail, and lose 12,000 men. So, fail. Now, by the way, you can see on the map over there to the left, circled in red is Antietam, and it's the little blue explosion right across in Maryland. That's where that took place, and then you can see now near Fredericksburg. Okay, and that's where Burnside failed and was forced to retreat as well. Okay, so at Chancellorsville, Lee divides his troops. Okay, so he has half of his troops under himself and half of his troops under Stonewall Jackson. Okay, and Stonewall Jackson, while going in to have a late night meeting with Lee, is not properly identified by one of the sentries, and the sentry shoots Stonewall Jackson, hits him in the hand. The hand is infected with gangrene, and so they have to take his hand. While he's in recovery and his body's in shock from having its hand cut off, he gets pneumonia and dies. Okay, Lee ends up winning the Battle of Chancellorsville, but losing Stonewall Jackson, he said that it was the worst victory that he faced in the war, and that had he had Stonewall Jackson after that the war would have gone completely differently, but he didn't have the competence that Stonewall Jackson did again. So Ulysses S. Grant, he becomes the last appointment to head the Army by Lincoln. He was not a very good student. He was good at riding horses. He was someone that didn't give up. That was one of the biggest things that he had, and he was willing to always, risk it for the biscuit. He would do anything he needed to win a battle. He hated being away from his family. He loved his wife so much that most of the time he was away, he was a drunkard. Okay? And so he drank really heavily. Okay? He didn't like people to see him naked, so he bathed alone in a tent. He didn't like the sight of blood. It would make him sick at his stomach, and often he would throw up. And that's because his family would make parchment, which is made from animal skins, and basically he worked with rotting animal flesh all the time, and that was not a sexy thing for him. He was also an adrenaline junkie. At one point, he will get a ticket for racing Andrew Johnson. Whenever he was president of the United States, their wagons will race each other, and he'll be given a ticket. At the Battle of Cold Harbor, Grant's going to lose 7,000 men in just a few minutes. And many Americans wanted him to be fired, but the one thing that he did that Lincoln loved was he always engaged the enemy, regardless of his numbers. So, with McClellan, he's not going to lead you to your death, but with Grant, he might, just if that could help him, win a battle. So, kind of a weird balance there. So the Battle of Vicksburg, this is one of the things that really kind of proves Grant, and that Grant was the right choice. Okay, the idea here is to capture Vicksburg and the Mississippi River and cut the South in half. So for 47 days, Grant is going to put Vicksburg under siege. He's going to surround the city, cut off all supplies and food going into the city, and just bomb it constantly for 47 days. And after 47 days, they surrendered. The Union now controlled the Mississippi River, and it was a matter of time until the South would be forced to surrender. This leads us to the Battle of Gettysburg. Okay, really the largest battle of the Civil War, the turning point of the Civil War. So this is a point where had the South won this battle, everything would have changed. Okay, so Lee moves his men into position. He orders George Pickett to take this one piece of land, and George Pickett makes one of the biggest blunders in the history of warfare, and he decides to attack the high ground, which you generally don't want to do that, but the first leg of the attack went through a swamp before you had a steep hill to climb. So in 30-minute period, Pickett is going to lose 10,000 of 15,000 men. Okay, which is substantial. The Confederates are going to have 28,000 casualties, or 1/3 of Lee's army. It was believed by the Confederates that if they had won this battle, that the British would recognize the Confederacy. But the very fact that they lose this battle, and especially the manner that they did, the British don't recognize the Confederacy, and now it's just a waiting game to see how much longer the South can hold out. Again, if they can hold out long enough still, then this is going to be the thing that, I mean, the South could have still won. But because of how aggressive Lee was in the Battle of Antietam and the Battle of Gettysburg, his numbers were just so decimated that he just doesn't have a chance of recovering. So, the Gettysburg Address. Lincoln is going to dedicate the battlefield as a military cemetery. There were 3 men that spoke that day. The first man spoke for over 2 hours. Lincoln's Gettysburg Address only takes him about 2.5 to 3 minutes to deliver, and it becomes one of the most influential speeches ever given by a president. Very eloquently written by Lincoln himself. This leads us to the end of today. I hope everyone's having a great day. We're getting so close to the end of the year. Please, no one cocaine, no one AIDS, no one COVID. And for the love of humanity, make sure that you bathe yourself. Good hygiene's always a good thing. Well, everyone have a great day, and I will see you soon. It's Christopher Paul, Doug Delamy, DMA, and have a good night.